And we just received more information for Warhammer The Old World. Excuse me. It's a bit interesting. Mainly the fact that we're not going to be in the same setting we were during the end times. I think for the vast majority of Warhammer Fantasy. But let's begin with the new information that we have. And we have a little interview from Rob saying we've hinted at an unprecedented amount of work that has gone into this new game and its setting. It encandled its secrecy behind the great oaken portcullis doors of the Warhammer studio. The Old World team has dedicated countless hours to research and playtesting. Our goal was to create a game that captures the best elements of all the editions of Warhammer Fantasy Battle, but at the same time provide new and exciting rules and fresh challenges to overcome. One of the most important aspects of Warhammer The Old World is the setting itself. Obviously, this is the world that was, a world of legend destroyed by the machinations of the ruinous powers of chaos at the culmination of the end times, an event that doomed the denizens of the Old World to oblivion and heralded the birth of the immortal realms of the Age of Sigmar, which we're not going to get into because I still don't like that, but still. It's important to remember, though, that even though the setting is returning, these events still happen, and that the Old World was destroyed. The end times had long been foreshadowed in the background of Warhammer Fantasy Battle, except nobody liked it, so people do like Age of Sigmar. The end times, nah, nobody liked that. The Great War Against Chaos. With the end of the world well documented, the design team wanted to explore the earlier history of the Old World in more depth, to examine events in the history of Warhammer in more detail than ever before. But which part of its long and storied history, should they focus on? Go too far back in time to the War of the Beard, or the time of Sigmar, for example, and the setting will become unfamiliar. This led us to the events well known to the fans of the Old World, the Great War Against Chaos and the Siege of Prague, which means we get Magnus as emperor, 2 centuries before the end times. More precisely, we decided to look into the decades prior to this legendary world-changing event. In those years before, the Chaos Lord Asvar Kul led his army south against the nations of men and dwarves. The Empire of Man was not unified. It was not a unified nation that bravely faced the armies of Archon that players of Warhammer Fantasy Battle will remember. Instead, it was a deeply divided and ravaged by war following centuries without the unifying presence of a single emperor. Anarchy in the Empire. Following the death of the famed Emperor Mandrad von Zeld, the Elector Counts were unable to decide upon a successor. And when Countess of Talabekland and the Count of Stirland mobilized their armies to claim the imperial throne by force, the lands of the empire fell into civil war. In the centuries that followed, numerous claimants of the imperial throne emerged, deepening the divides between the provinces of the empire and prolonging the civil war. That's at the time Warhammer The Old World is set in the years before the Siege of Prague. The empire stands divided, so I was wrong. Was they? Because I'm thinking about the game, the part from the game with the Diablo clone they had for Warhammer Fantasy. I might be wrong. Let's see. Riven by intrigue and beset by internecine war, one of the many provinces that formed the empire, four stand tall. Of the many provinces that formed the empire, 4 stand tall, their mighty rulers pressing their claim for the imperial throne and hoping to reunify the fractured realm. The barony of the Westerland. Ruled by Elspeth Margrita the Sixth, Westerland is a wealthy province, its merchant lords grown fat on the trade that flows through Marienburg's vast harbors. The Grand County of Osterland, ruled from the great city of Middelheim, by Count Sigismund Ulrich, Osterland is home to the Wolf Emperors of the North, fierce devotees of Ulrich. The Principality of Reichland. Occupying the heartland of Sigmar's empire, the Reichland is ruled by the pious Prince Wilhelm I of Altdorf, a devout servant of the empire's patron deity. And the Grand Duchy of Talabek, the largest and most culturally diverse of the 4 provinces. Talabek is ruled from the great walled city of Talabheim by Duke Ludwig XII. In Warhammer The Old World, we discover an empire weakened by centuries of civil war, vulnerable to the ever-present threat posed by rampaging armies of invaders. Beastman Brayherds surge from the deep forests, burning and defiling all that stands before them. From the moors and mountains come roving bands of orc and goblins, looting and pillaging. While in the distant and forgotten realms, ancient kings sit upon crumbling thrones, planning their reconquest of the lands of the living. Yet beyond these present threats looms the specter of something far greater, the armies of Asvarkul amassing in the north. While we know the empire would ultimately unify under the leadership of the great Magnus the Pious and turn back the armies of chaos, at what cost will this unity come? And there are many stories they would like to tell before that, but this is what we have right now. So in a way, I was right with Magnus the Pious. It is related to the events of the game, but it's interesting because it's set before the game, before the whole Magnus fights Asvar, kills him, becomes emperor and stuff. I think it's an interesting setting to go into. It is a little less explored than what we know mainly, or the bigger parts of lore for Warhammer Fantasy. And I think that's pretty good, to be honest. It will be a problem when people that have Empire models that have Karl Franz all written all over them are brought up to this world, since who's Karl Franz, but it's doable. It's doable. I hope they keep the fucking square bases. I really love square bases for these kinds of games, so that would really be important for me. Lore-wise, I think it's interesting. You get like 4 duchies, big duchies to pick from, which I think we can basically equivalent them to Space Marine chapters or legions, because it really feels they're going that route, which is interesting. I'm not gonna say no. I had my decent fun with the Age of Darkness box set, so I think it's going good until now. It looks promising, and I like the old world. Thank you, Total War Warhammer, that you helped me get into it, because I got into Warhammer when the end times happened. So that was kind of awful. Anyway, it's interesting. It looks good. If they bring back square bases, I'm kind of sold on it. But let's just take our time for the moment. Let's see where it evolves from here, because that's a very important aspect, especially with Games Workshop, the way things evolve from their current position. So again, let's keep our grains of salt, let's keep our seeds of salt at bay, and be prepared to launch them. Here's an interesting thing. Let's talk about something I didn't like. And I didn't like the whole end times things. Oh, they were always bound to happen, bruh. Yeah, I don't really believe you. Now, I don't have the experience or the wealth of knowledge like other people that have been into this longer have, but the signs are there after being a long Warhammer fan, and we know how that ends, okay? The signs are kind of there, and it's telling me that, maybe you're not right with the whole end times thing. It doesn't look that good. It feels like they're doubling down and they're trying to be like, no, we didn't make any mistake by destroying the franchise while it was getting a Total War Warhammer game. No, we didn't destroy it before we had an amazing game down the line finally after years for this game. No, we didn't do that. No. The end times are always bound to happen, bruh. that can't change. Except you can. And here's the interesting thing. The most smart move they could probably do is, with this going back in time, is be like this. It's an alternate universe. The end times never happened. We're exploring parts of the old world, old world's history, and going further from there while evolving the setting until we reach the point that we were in, what was it? Warhammer 8th edition, 9th edition? Before the end times? That would be a smart move, but corporals don't really like admitting they're wrong and they make mistakes, even when they see it as lost opportunities to make more money. And we all know they care about money to the degree that they want to please their customers enough to make as much money as possible. That's why we have the old world right now, because they missed up on a ton of money. If only they were smarter. But they weren't on that case. I guess that's all for now. Let's see what happens next.